Back in 2015, I wrote the book, Is the Atheist My Neighbor? And it was a critique of what I called the rebellion thesis, which is the view that all disbelief in God's existence is born of a sinful suppression of actual belief in God. In other words, the atheist, according to the rebellion thesis, actually does believe in God, but refuses to acknowledge the very belief they have because they desire instead to sin. This is an extraordinary thesis. I mean, in terms of the psychology, the claim that every person who says they do not believe God exists, in fact, really does believe God exists. And it's even more extraordinary, I think, to make that sweeping declaration about millions, literally millions and millions of people, based upon a citation of a biblical text, Romans 1. And yes, that is what many Christians do. And one of them is right here. And so we're going to take a look at this. This is R.C. Sproul, the late R.C. Sproul, who well-known Reformed theologian and Christian apologist. And in this clip, he's kind of laughing with another fellow, talking about how he told some atheists, he gave them what for by telling them that they actually really do believe in God. You can just listen to the exchange, and then we're going to debrief it afterward.
I can remember being invited to speak, giving the case for the existence of God on a college campus to the Atheist Club there. And I went through a defense of theism and so on, but I went back to the Romans passage and I said, no, I'm happy to try to discuss with you all the intellectual questions that are involved in trying to prove and demonstrate the existence of God. But I want to put my cards on the table up front and tell you, in light of what the apostle teaches here, I'm persuaded that I'm carrying coals to Newcastle because you already know very well that there's a God, and your problem is not that you don't know that God exists. Your problem is you hate the God that you know exists. So your problem is, in the final analysis, not an intellectual one, it's a moral one. So you got to know that's where I'm coming from. Well, they were ready to tar and feather me, you know.
What was their reaction?
Oh, they were apoplectic. They were absolutely furious about it.
Okay. Wow. This is extraordinary. I gotta tell you. Okay, so again, here's this picture. R.C. Sproul has been invited to come speak at an atheist group on a college campus. This is what we call hospitality, right? When a person or a group invites you into their space in order to share with them what your views are. So he comes into that space, and then before he even starts, first of all, he uses this metaphor that I'm guessing many people would not have understood, carrying coals to Newcastle. We'll set that aside. But then he says, actually, you really do believe in God. And so you're lying. You're a bunch of liars because you say you don't believe in God, but really you do. And not only are you liars, you're sinful and wicked because you're suppressing that belief because you want to sin and you don't want to be responsible to God. And he kind of laughs here, and the interviewer laughs with him because then, what was their response? Well, they were angry. Yeah, do you think so? I mean, how do people respond when they invite you into their space and your first instinct is to start insulting them? I mean, this is the equivalent of taking your muddy boots and wiping it on their white carpet in their living room after they've invited you in for dinner. That's what he's doing here. So, I mean, just in terms of basic hospitality, basic decorum, this is such gross behavior. I mean, and the thing is that this is one of the things that I've often seen from Christians. By Christians, I mean, obviously some Christians, right? Other Christians are wonderful, but some Christians, what they do is that they engage with others in a way that is insulting, condescending, off-putting. And then those other people are offended. And the Christian concludes, well, Jesus told us they would hate us because we are his children, or something like that. Well, it is true that sometimes you will find opposition because you are a faithful disciple. It's also very true that sometimes you'll find opposition because you're being a jerk. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, are people offended by me because I'm such a faithful follower of Jesus? I'm loving my neighbor as myself and taking up my cross daily, and they just find that to be an affront? Or is it possible that they are offended because I'm just being a jerk? And that's a question that I think R.C. Sproul maybe would have done well to ask himself when he's standing in the midst of the atheist club at this university campus, telling them that they all really do believe God exists. Even if you believe that is the case, even if you accept this rebellion thesis, it doesn't mean it makes sense or that it's proper basic decorum in order to start telling people, sharing your views of the nature of their rebellion within that context. So that's my first big takeaway point. The second thing I want to highlight is just in terms of Sproul's a priori approach to theology. By that, I mean, he reads Romans 1, 18 and 23, appears to say that God's existence and nature have been made plain to everybody so that nobody is without excuse. And so now Sproul concludes, okay, based upon that, I know that any single person I will ever meet in history who claims not to believe in God is in fact a liar. Let's apply that same kind of logic in another context. And one that I often like to go to is the context of corporal punishment and what the Bible says about corporal punishment, physically hitting people as a mode of punishment. Here are some examples of the abundant instances of corporal punishment in the Bible. Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. In other words, if you love your child, you will physically hit your child with a stick. I mean, literally, that's what that is saying. Now, you can also say, yeah, but there's a general principle there of it's important to exercise discipline over your child if you love them, and authority, exercise authority over your child. Indeed, that is the general principle. But Proverbs 13:24 also gives you the concrete instantiation of the general principle. And the concrete instantiation of it, how you live it out, is by physically hitting your child. That's how you exercise authority over them and discipline them. Proverbs 23:13 and 14, similarly, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. So if you want to raise up your child in a way that the fear of the Lord, you need to hit your child. You need to beat your child with a stick. Proverbs 22:15, Proverbs 29:15, Proverbs 22:6, multiple examples. And there are, the Proverbs are just a starting place. So William Webb in his book, Corporal Punishment in the Bible, goes through all the biblical texts in which biblical authors endorse physically beating children as a mode of discipline. And beating them with a stick, a sebet in Hebrew, a rod, and doing so multiple times, up to 39 times on the back, as a way of instilling discipline in the child. Now, so you can say, a priori, based upon what the Proverbs clearly say, and other biblical texts, what they clearly say, that physically beating children is a good thing, and that you're not even going to consider any evidence a posteriori. In other words, you're not going to consider the actual impact of physically beating children, what it has on those children. You're not going to consider psychological studies that might provide empirical evidence that, in fact, corporal punishment is wrong and harmful, and there are far better ways to raise a children up in a way that, in the fear of the Lord and with pro-social behavior and so on. You're not going to look at any of that evidence, because all you need is that the Proverbs tell you it's right to beat your children. Now, the reality is that the vast majority of Christians, thankfully, today in North America and some other parts of the world, not all parts of the world, but in North America and Europe and some other parts of the world, I think by and large recognize that, no, we should not beat our children. That's not the best way to raise them up in the fear of the Lord. Of course, again, not all Christians agree with that, but many do, and I think that they're exactly right to do so. And the reason that they do so is because I think of the empirical evidence that, in fact, physically beating children is harmful. The a posteriori evidence that there are better ways to raise up your child than to beat them. And so now you go back and you say, well, I'm going to have to find another way to interpret these proverbial utterances that endorse the beating of children. Maybe I'm going to take a step back and say, well, really the takeaway principle here is, again, to exercise authority and discipline. But maybe the proverb was incorrect. Maybe the proverbialist was incorrect to give the concrete instantiation of that as being physically hitting them with a stick. So you still want to engage with the text and find some teaching in the text, but you have to revise what that teaching is because of the a posteriori evidence. So then we come back to Paul in Romans 1, and I think we're in a very similar situation here. What Paul says at first blush is the evidence for God is overwhelming, and for God's existence and his nature, so that everyone is without excuse, and thus any person who purports to disbelieve in God, well, they must be a liar, right? But then you go out and you talk to people, and you have a very similar experience to being forced to recalibrate your thinking on corporal punishment. You're thinking, yeah, but this guy, he actually genuinely doesn't believe in God. I mean, I know him. I've known him for months or years. In good conscience, he's struggled. He wanted to believe. I've known him on his journey, but now he is in a place of unbelief. And gosh, it sure seems to me that I cannot declare a priori, simply based upon citing Romans 1, that he is sinfully suppressing his belief in God. It does seem like he just doesn't believe God exists. Maybe he really wants to believe in God, but it just seems like he doesn't. That would be the a posteriori approach, in which case then you'd go back to Romans 1 and say, you know, it seems to me like I want to extract a general principle that Paul is endorsing here, analogous to saying, yeah, we need to affirm discipline and authority within the Proverbs without necessarily adopting the concrete instantiation that we should beat children. So we want to adopt the general principle that God does not leave people without evidence, without necessarily adopting the concrete principle that every single person who is not a theist is thereby in sinful rebellion against God. And that would be just a forced recalibration, a forced reinterpretation of the text based upon other external factors, saying we cannot determine the meaning and application or significance of this text a priori. Simply upon the reading of it, we have to go out and look whether our reading actually matches the data of the world around us. One last thing to add to this is that one of the interesting applications that I think Christians almost always miss when it comes to this passage of these words of Paul in Romans 1 is that they condemn Christians as surely as they condemn atheists. I mean, how so? Well, again, if it's true that all people are without excuse because God's existence and nature have been plainly made evident to all people, as R.C. Sproul argues, then it follows not only that atheists are in sinful rebellion against God, but any Christian who has any doubt about God's existence or God's nature is also in sinful rebellion against God, because God's existence is manifestly plain to that Christian as well as the atheist. So, for example, Mother Teresa, in her journals, which were famously published after her death, they show somebody who wrestled with doubt in God. Mother Teresa wrestled with the thought of, does God exist? And is God good? Like, is God a really loving, good person? And does he exist if he and does he even exist? I mean, so these are the kinds of questions that Mother Teresa wrestled with. And they're actually the kind of questions that millions of Christians around the world wrestle with at various moments in their own journey. If R.C. Sproul is correct in his interpretation of Romans 1, then Romans 1 indicts, it condemns every one of those Christians, because every doubt that they have, any doubt, any question that they have about God's existence or God's nature is as much in bad faith as the atheists, because they too are sinfully suppressing the overwhelming evidence for God's existence and God's nature that is present and available to all people in creation all the time. And I think that is a crazy conclusion. It is like equivalent to the worst word of faith theology, cognitively speaking. So in word of faith theology, any sin or any physical suffering you have, and any lack of material resources you have, any lack of wealth that you have, is a result of your sinful rebellion against God, your failure to exercise faith. If you exercise a word of faith in word of faith or prosperity theology, you will not be physically unwell, and you will not be lacking in material resources. So any lack is born of a lack of faith. And it's ultimately your responsibility. It's your culpability. It's your sin that leads you to have some physical illness or leads you to have some material lack, money, lack of money. And by the same token, on this argument, any doubt you have ever in God's existence or any doubt you have in God's nature would be a result of you sinfully suppressing your belief in the overwhelming evidence in God's existence and his nature. So unless you are willing to condemn every Christian who's ever had any doubt, you should be very careful about applying that same text to atheists.